Welcome to the Thing About Witch Hunts. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. Today we are excited to talk with playwright Matt Cox about his play, Witches in Salem? It's a fresh take on the Salem Witch Trials that manages to be both historically accurate and surprisingly funny.
Matt spent 8 years developing this play, transforming it from a simple comedy about two fantasy witches into a nuanced exploration of the actual history and human nature behind the 1692 tragedy.
As a descendant of Rebecca Nurse and Mary Esty, when I recently saw a production of this play at Estes Park High School here in Colorado, I was struck by how Witches in Salem manages to honor the victims while also helping audiences understand the very human motivations that led to such devastating consequences.
We'll be discussing how Matt incorporated real historical research, why he chose to include actual fantasy witches who never get blamed, and how the play has evolved through different versions.
Matt's approach reminds us that the people involved in Salem weren't monsters. They were humans like us, responding to fear, social pressure, and their own petty grievances in ways that spiraled tragically out of control. It's both a sobering reminder and surprisingly a source of hope for learning to do better.
So let's talk to Matt Cox about witches in Salem and what it means to find truth and even humor in one of history's darkest chapters.
Thank you for joining us today. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Hi, I'm Matt Cox. I'm a playwright. I'm a writer based in New York City, and very specifically of interest of this show, I wrote a play called Witches in Salem that ran in New York last spring in 2024, and now is available through a licensing company called Uproar Theatrics. So a lot of high schools and regional theaters and whatnot are doing the show all around the country, which is amazing.
I recently attended a production of your play at Estes Park High School in Colorado. I loved it. As a human and as a descendant of Rebecca Nurse and Mary Esty, it was very meaningful to me for both of those reasons.
Oh, amazing. That makes me happy to hear. Yeah, because it's the play itself, I guess a little bit about it for anybody who may want to know. Yeah, it tries to be a very faithful retelling of sort of the actual history while also adding in sort of the aspects of modern day that maybe correlate a little bit with it and sort of try to draw a horrible sense of humor from the fact that as much as time goes by, sometimes nothing ever changes. And at some point, you could either sort of dread that in all your life, or you could start to laugh at it and try to figure out how we change that. And Witches in Salem is trying to tap into that mindset throughout it, but in doing so, I've tried to use as much from the actual history as I could. And so that makes me very happy to hear, because usually it's a comedy, but the jokes tend to try to be at the expense of the people who, at least from the research that I use of it, seem to be the ones who caused it all to happen. And so you're only ever laughing at them, and typically at least not at anyone who was a victim of the witch trials in Salem.
Yeah, I have to say kudos on getting all those facts in there. I haven't been able to see it like Sarah has, but I've read it, and it's just amazing everything that you tell in there. So many relevant points that we've heard other people say on the show before.
Amazing. Good. They are good. We did it. Yeah, no, it's funny. So I worked on this show for too long. I think I worked on it for 8 years before we ultimately put it up. And it went through quite a journey in terms of its tone as well. Because again, I started it in 2016 after I saw a Broadway production of The Crucible by Arthur Miller that was directed by Ivo Van Ho, which was incredible. But it had this one very specific moment towards the end of, I think, the first act, whenever all the girls start yelling for the first time. And then all of a sudden the wind picked up and there was howling. In my mind, it was just is this implying that the magic is real? And that sort of set my mind spinning, because one of the premises of my show is throughout all of the things that are happening, again, very historical and at least trying to do it, there are two real, very fantasy coded witches who are present, who just never get blamed, because ultimately that wasn't what it was about from the people blaming them. And so that origin came from me seeing this production of The Crucible that had seemingly real magic going on. It was oh, what if there were two real people there who just never got blamed? And for a very long time, for the history of the show, it was just about them, and it was trying to be an odd couple comedy. And I very specifically had not done any research about it and was trying to go off of The Crucible. And that was a little bit because it was 2016, and the world and the country was kind of looking like a different place. And then as things shifted and more of these things became relevant, very sadly and tragically, I started being like, well, this isn't as funny as it was a few years ago. And then started doing a lot more of like the research, and then the more and more I read, the more fascinating it was, and all these things that I never learned, even though I studied the Crucible like many children do in school. It's just these things that are just absolutely fascinating, and I was shocked never come up, at least in these sort of historical things. So I was trying to get as much of that in as I could, and then that's how the play evolved and eventually happened. And a lot was left on the cutting room floor as well.
I always think there is so much to the actual story and history that it is terrible and shocking, but so much of it you're just like, this has got to be a joke too. So you were really, and seeing it on the stage presented by teenagers at the beginning of their life and their acting life too, I can't imagine this won't have a huge impact on them. I'm so happy you're describing how you came to put these different elements into the story.
It's fascinating to me. I haven't had the opportunity to see a high school perform it. Yeah, I did one like reading of it with the group. I do not remember specifically what high school, but it was at like a high school theater conference. And so hearing it even from them at that stage in time, because it was very much built for my sort of group of actors in New York who are all in their 30s, late 20s, mid 30s, which is very different than high school kids doing it. And so I'm happy to see, though, that it seems to transcend, especially given there's some relevancy to those ages, certainly in the story and the history of it. Yeah.
What does Witches in Salem even mean?
It's ultimately, it's a very sort of pessimistic take on that, even as much as we can. This is, a story that we learn about in high school. And many people do study it, and yet it never really seems like that truth settles in people in a way that they actually learn the lessons from it. Obviously, a lot of people do, but like the people who make the decisions seem to ultimately keep ending up in cycles of making these same kinds of mistakes and putting people in these same kinds of situations and making the world a worse place. And it's trying to bring out the facts about people like Thomas Putnam and Samuel Paris, who, at least the research that I was using throughout this, were very much instigators to whatever extent of this happening. And it's trying to find modern day parallels with a lot of like modern day politicians or business people and things like that. It's very much about like the truth and how we learn from history, and also how we very often do not. Yeah. And then there's a little bit of like a side story within that of just like the act of adapting history, and how there isn't as much of this in the play, I think, ultimately, as it was throughout the creation of it. But I looked at a lot about how most people know this story through like the Crucible or something like that, and how much of that is sort of fabricated for the sake of fitting it onto a stage. And there was a lot of the play that was about me having to do that and starting from a place, at least at one point, of trying to make it very historically accurate, and then finding all the places where you have to go, you can't, because you can't have, at least we didn't have 30, 40 actors in it. So you have to start combining people. And then what does that mean if you're showing history, but it's not actually history? And it was trying to reckon with that a little bit as well. So yeah, it's very much about the truth in history and what either of those words actually mean.
Yeah. One of the things that, just as an audience member, and as a descendant, obviously I have that lens on, I'm always judging Salem material through that lens and experience. But one of the things that your play does, and maybe it wasn't even supposed to be a really big part of it, but for me, also, I'm going to add one more layer as a podcast host talking to experts about witch trials and witch hunts. We're always discussing what could have been impacting these people. What were the reasons? How did it happen? What were their stresses? Why was there this fear? And I loved how you put a lot of those fears in there. Even the simple one of them waiting for the governor to walk through the door. I'm like, someone who is trying to understand the history can understand more about putting themselves in the shoes of people in Salem in 1692 by enjoying your story. So thank you. I loved that piece. And then, of course, I mean, there were so many pieces. I don't want to give all the things away, obviously, but Samuel Paris and his wood, loving his wood, and just seeing this kid say Samuel Paris holding this wood, and then I'm so excited my my microphone's jumping around, but that was so fabulous. It was just, when we say comedy or that we're laughing at it, it's the human side of it that
was
is
'cause
humorous.
that's a great example, because it's something very terrible happened because some of the very petty human nature of these people and things that we can still relate to so much. But yeah, so it was like, that's one thing I tried to cling on to. And it's obviously, there's the actual real life thing of it was much deeper than just the man was obsessed with like the Samuel Paris, the Reverend, was very much obsessed with his payment and all these superficial things like that. But the easiest thing that I always try to use, because what his payment was firewood, and there's a lot of things where he was in dispute with the rest of the congregation about he's not getting his firewood, and just letting that be his one focus, that all this happened because this man wanted his firewood. Thomas Putnam didn't get what he wanted from his dad, and then how that sort of snowballs into other people see what these people are doing, and they're like, oh, they seem to be benefiting from this, maybe I can too, and I'm going to keep on adding it until it grows so out of control. Yeah. And I think that, again, that's tragically been relevant throughout all of history. And eventually, as much as it's not funny, it is horribly funny that these things can just spin out of it. And I think at some point you have to laugh at, I don't know, how awful humans can be in some of the worst times. Yeah.
That actually reminds me of one of my favorite characters in the play is Satan. He's not in there very often, but he tells you why he's not in there very often in the beginning. And it's that, don't blame this on me. This is the way that human nature works. That's a point we've made so many times on the show. You've got to look at the human beings who were responsible and realize that they're just like us, aren't they?
And especially throughout like history, one of the Satan character is very funny. So I assume the version of the high school one you saw did not have that character in it. Yes. So we offer, because I imagine that a lot of schools probably don't want to do a play necessarily that starts with Satan talking to them. So I offered a version where that character is removed and it just focuses on like there's a young school, a 14-year-old, 13-year-old girl who she's in both versions, but the other one, she just leads the story. And funny enough, again, just by development of plays, that came about because for the longest time, she was the main focus. Prior to her, there was a version where it was just Satan. I replaced her with them. And then like right before we did the production, I was like, I still like the idea so much of Satan starting the show and being like, I didn't have anything to do with this. To spin off of that idea that, throughout history, we're always looking for something to blame that isn't us. So it's like the rye, whatever the specific poisoning is, ergot. And things like, it's always looking for that, or it was the religion, or it was Satan, or something like that. And it's just like, no, eventually you have to own up to it, and that's the only way we can learn from it. And we tend to not do that. Yeah, and so the Satan character, when we did it, at least in New York, I actually played that part as well, because it was added at the last minute. And I was like, well, we're not going to have another actor. I'll do it. It'll be fun to pop in, do this for a little bit. And I had a good time playing it. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that you have both versions available for whatever an organization's comfort level is. When I watched it, Satan was not in it. And my sister went with me to the production, and she turned to me afterwards, well, what did you think? And I said, there was a really important character missing. It was Satan. Like it was an error. I just thought how you pulled this off without actually having the devil as the culprit. He was there. He was the culprit. He just wasn't in the form of one of the actors. That was so funny. And then I'm going in and reading the other manuscript. I'm like, he started right out with the devil. And I find it poignant because the General Court of Massachusetts blamed him. And that is what is on the record right now for those who have been exonerated. It says that they were deluded by the devil.
You used the phrase just deluded by Satan as being the thing. Yeah, specifically that's on the reports of it. That was my favorite book. The book that was sort of the most influential to this was Francis Hill's Delusion of Satan, which I do highly recommend if people have not ever read that, because it gave me all of the bits of history where I was like, oh my goodness, how have I never heard about this? There were so many of that in that book, which is constantly that. And it's the namesake of Anne Putnam's speech later on, where it was just like, oh, it wasn't me. It was Satan. Yeah. Which, yes, is just fascinating.
One of the other things that I really appreciate is what you did for Tituba with your piece. We're able to have a memorial brick installed with Tituba's name on it. at the House of the Seven Gables. And I did that because her name is it's not often in memory. It's part of this juicy story. And she was just a woman, an enslaved woman. But I really enjoyed that you were able to not just have her depicted as a character in your play, but that you talked about who she was.
Yeah, that was a big part of the development process of me going back and forth of how much I even wanted that, just because by nature of I am a white male playwright. I don't know how much I necessarily have to say about this, but the absence of it whenever it wasn't there just felt a little bit too much, just given, again, of how much of it is about the adaptation of truth and about the lessons that we learn. It did feel like an important part of, just because, again, going back to the Crucible, and that being where so much of people's knowledge they think they have comes with it, and how much she's positioned as the instigator to far more of an extent than she actually is. It just felt like something I wanted to at least touch on, be like, well, here's the actual, at least as far as people can agree, is the actual history, because obviously that's something that even today they don't quite know because the records just aren't there. But yeah, no, it felt very important to try to get the actual history that is often wrong. But yes, I'm glad that was appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the references in there to the Crucible and the corrections that you make to the Crucible. Basically, Abigail Williams was 11 or 12, and she wasn't sleeping with John Proctor, who was actually in his 60s.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's important to mention those things.
Yeah. And it was right there, again, because the play went through so many iterations. There was a version at some point in time that was much more of, oh, we're going to parody the Crucible a little bit, but then it just wasn't as like satisfying, because it was just like, oh, it's wrong again. So it's just trying to find the things that are so prevalent and in people's minds, and trying to at least be like, that's actually not how it went down, just enough. But actually, I kind of like that it doesn't really focus on it too much, and it sort of acts as its own little piece of Salem on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't feel like I was experiencing the same old thing at all. It's totally new of all the adaptations we've seen to the history, and that, I don't know, it is really, really marvelous what you did with the story.
Amazing.
The witch and the wizard, the pop culture
Yes.
witch and
Yes,
the
yes.
wizard, what a brilliant element. How did that make it into the story?
Yeah, so I loosely touched on this earlier. So originally the play was just fully about these two characters in it named Xanatar and Bellavira. Their function in the play as it is right now is they have a much smaller part than they used to, but it is, for anyone who hasn't seen it and read it, yeah, there's throughout this show, every once in a while, once we're in the church, whenever finally all of the villagers of Salem, the village and the town, sort of find out whenever it's announced that there's witches here and we're going to put them in there, where they're going to start trying to turn people against them and rile up the town. In walks a woman who is very clearly a witch, and she's soon joined by someone who is very clearly a wizard. And one of the original jokes of the show that still maintains it is, it's like, there's witches in Salem, and then these two characters sort of just going like, what? No, God, that can't be. And so their function in the show is just to be like, it is a very on the nose way of showing that this wasn't about looking for witches, actual witches, because in this version of the story, there's two very clear real witches and wizards right there doing blatant witches and wizard things. But, we're after land and other things, not that. And so, yeah, originally the play was very much about them and just following them, experiencing the witch trials and having a little bit more of a presence in it. And eventually the only time, this is an old draft of the story, like the wizard finally did get blamed, but it was because he accidentally stumbled into learning the truth. And then I go, oh, this guy's a wizard. And yeah. But as more and more of the research, the more and more I read books, as a good playwright should, when reading something in history, the more and more I was interested in focusing on the actual story of it. But because the original idea was about this, and I thought it still held such a good, again, going back to it, it's not about real witches and wizards. It was such a good little juicy thing, and it was an easy way to still have some good bits in it, because I am predominantly a comedy writer. Yeah.
Yeah, on that point, I've got to say, we've been talking about how much history there is in the play. It's not at all overwhelming. It doesn't even come up on whelming. It's nicely dosed throughout the story and presented entertainingly. So people are laughing while they're learning.
Yeah.
It's an awesome way to do it.
Yeah. That was always the hope with it. Yeah. And it's always, I am very much as a writer, I try to think of things as presented as more like a ride to whatever extent. There's ups and downs. You're going on a journey with me in everything that I write. And I wanted to try to make sure, as much as this has informative tidbits, that it's always presented in such a way that you're not bored and you're evening out at the theater.
When I got to the high school, some of the family were talking about how long it was going to be. And I was like, really, it's that long? And it was, I think their production was almost 3 hours. It was a long one, but it just went by because I think I know the story so well. I kind of knew what was up around the bend, but I didn't. That's what is so enjoyable about this, because there's lots of surprises. And the characters are just so rich, and they really, like, when you're thinking about stories from history, these are the kinds of characters you want to meet that have the real feelings and share their mind and have these interactions. You really portrayed that.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I sort of comes back to my style as a writer. I have an improv background, and I did a lot of studying at the Upright Citizens Brigade here. And there's a concept called like game in a scene, where it's you find like the first weird or interesting thing, and then you hit that over and over again, and you examine that from as many sides as you can of how to keep that interesting. And so I tend to, whenever I write a character, I try to find that one interesting thing and then explore it from all the angles. And having, again, real people to at least loosely base that off, whether it's their historical nature or the way they've been presented and other media and things like that. That's how I try to tackle each of the characters in this Salem story, by finding either the one thing that we do know about them, or the kids, like some of more of their actual, like, real life, like, neuroticisms that probably, like Betty Paris, who's a reverend's daughter, and trying to do the modern day pop culture sensibility of, oh yeah, that there's a lot of pressure in trying to be that perfect one. And oh, of course, she would probably have a emotional and mental breakdown whenever being asked to be a part of something like the accusations and whatnot. Yeah. And so I try to do that with every single character. So I'm glad at least that they are popping off on the stage still.
Absolutely.
And the characters come to such great insights in this story as well. There's one in there that really stood out to me. That's a character talking about how Goody Good makes her feel. She's like, Goody Good is always asking me for something, and I'm always saying no, but then I feel guilty about saying no. And we've had that conversation with a couple of the experts on witch trials before, and it is a thing that people feel guilty for not giving, and they end up in turn blaming that person, for even asking. And so people got accused of witchcraft for exactly that reason all over the world. So,
yeah. It's again, it's one of those aspects of the stuff that you can take that and put that on several different societal groups nowadays, and how they are villainized or othered by whatever agenda that exists out there. And so it's just all, we loop back and forth over to these things. And it would have been the same thing in the play. Its function is to be like, yeah, this is how they're slowly turning people into the idea of like, oh, you get to blame somebody for your bad feelings that isn't yourself. Isn't that great? Isn't it cool that you don't have to deal with this on your own side? And then, of course, because part of it was in doing all of that, while it's very much clear that we're trying to show that, yeah, what this person, by riling that person up in order to blame and ultimately kill these people, is bad, there was at least trying to have this slightest bit of like, if you were in that seat, could you have been convinced as well by the same way? If by Thomas Putnam saying these things out loud and bringing it to you, is like at least trying to have some aspect where the actor can try to play the convincing part, even though a good modern day audience will probably look at him with judgment. But yeah.
Well, I think that's really key what you're pointing out. And again, we have been looking at this on our podcast a lot, that it's not just monsters that do terrible things. It's all of us that are human. Sometimes something just goes too far, and it doesn't mean that person was necessarily worse than, it is a different type of human. It's our type of human. And you could definitely, as an audience member, I could definitely put myself in the shoes of any of those characters. I didn't like it. I enjoyed the teen girls' perspective on what was happening around them. Loved that. But I could see where Putnam and Paris, how they were buddying up and what they were doing there too. I'm like, yeah, I can see that.
In 1692, all of the were experiencing this like horrible winter. There was a war at their doorstep. People were getting sick all the time. There was this big political division in the town. And so it was also trying to find as many different ways to be like this, not things that ultimately did have so much to do with it, but we don't think of it as also being the things that are happening like right now. And they're also causing all of these divisions where people are finding ways to other and get mad at other people, that it's all just there. Yeah. And so that is a big part why I kept wanting to write this story, because all that just kept making itself seem so evident. Yeah.
We see so many of those things in our own society and around the world that cause these problems, but still everybody wants to assign that one simple reason to explain away Salem, like the ergot you touched on earlier, or they'll say, oh, it was encephalitis, or it was just hysteria. Everybody went hysterical and started pointing fingers at everybody. But it's just people like us getting off on the wrong track.
Yeah. I think people like a clean explanation, and sadly, the world very rarely actually has a clean explanation for anything. But we love to assign things that, yeah, I don't know. That is just human nature. It's also, again, no one's other than some stories do oftentimes have villains. Oftentimes there's a lot of people who are just on the outskirts of it, and it's what you do with the information after the fact as much as it is then. And a lot of people back then who were privy on the outside of this all did come to their senses at some point. It did feel a great sense of shame. And I don't know, I guess that's the part of it that's interesting. That's why we still keep coming back to it, though, because not everybody does learn their lessons. Yeah.
Yeah. How did writing this story, how has it impacted your new work or the way you tackle your writing now?
Yeah. So part of it was just through from just a technical standpoint of writing something for 8 years and having 8 to not 10 probably different versions of how the story was being told was just incredibly helpful for me as a writer. So the more and more of like the research and how to write something off of research was something I hadn't really ever done before either. But yeah, and it's definitely made me, I have to figure out what the subject is, but through my work in this, I do want to tackle another historical project and again, try to find something that is maybe something we think we know, but we don't actually know as much of. I have a very strong yearning to experiencing that again. Yes, that I am taking some time before that, because again, I don't necessarily know if I have another 8-year process in me. But yeah, so it's certainly that journey of it. It was like one of the first shows that I tried to put on back in the city post like the pandemic, which also just had its own whole series of lessons, because especially here in New York, the theater scene, especially small plays like this, that we weren't on Broadway, we were at this off Broadway theater. We had like 98 seats, something like that. And that world still really hasn't recovered in any way, and trying to figure out how to get these stories in front of people is an evolving process. I was very happy with our run when we did it in the city. We actually were able to sell quite well, which was shocking. So there were just the practical lessons like that. Yeah. I guess it's mostly that I really enjoyed it and I want to do it again with something else.
I think you're a role model for other creators to have taken historical people, make this beautiful fiction, and then get that pop culture element in there. So,
No, good. I tend to, as a writer, I focus mostly on like genre stories, things like this. So this was, while it still has a lot of elements of that, it is more of just a story, a real story. And I'm glad that comes across. Yeah, because most of my other work, the play that I'm most known for is this one called Puffs, or 7 Increasingly Eventful Years at a Certain School of Magic and Magic, which is like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead style, like side story about a certain boy wizard that a lot of people are familiar with. And so that's the world that I usually work in. And so this was a very fun thing that I basically worked with at the same time, which is probably why some of the more fantastical elements seeped in, just because by nature of I was living in a fantasy world most of the time. And I think what I love about theater and writing plays, because you're ultimately making something for these actors to inhabit, And so one of the reasons I loved writing Puffs was because people get to put on wizard capes and they get to live out that fantasy. And then this is a completely other thing where you are actually you get to have the opportunity to, there's a learning part of it. You're inhabiting a real person. And this is why I love that it is now in like the hands of high schools and that they get to have this opportunity that is, while it's similar and fun, there is this other element of like, it's a challenge, I think, for them to get to step into these types of roles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we move on to talk about what's next for you, I want to ask you first, is there anything about witches in Salem that you wanted to talk about today that we haven't touched on yet?
I feel like we've mostly covered everything. We went through all the history of it. I'm very happy. I think the one biggest thing with it, yeah. So if anyone is interested in reading the script, any of the multiple versions of it, it's available through a company called Uproar Theatrics, uproartheatrics.com. They have the scripts available for a free perusal there. And especially if you're looking, if you run a theater group or something like that, or you're looking for a new play, that's a great place to look for it. As mentioned, there's several versions of it. There's one that's more for adults. That's the exact version that we performed in New York. There's another one that cuts Satan out of it, and that's specifically for high schools. There's another one that's like a 45-minute version that's for play competitions, and that one's fascinating. So again, there's the Satan version where Satan's sort of the book end of the story. There's one that's just this teenage girl telling the story, and then there's another one that fully removes her, and it's more focuses entirely on how the witches interact within the real history of it. If you're also just interested to see how many different ways a play can be put out there, it's a fascinating take on that. Weirdly, the 10-year development process of it benefited it. Yeah. Something I guess I just find so interesting about having worked on this play for so long was a quote of mine that I was never able to re-find. That I guess I know I read it at some point and that I could never find it again. So who knows if I am actually making it up. But there was a quote from Arthur Miller where at one point he said that he had done so much research that he could not remember what he had made up and what was true, which is where some of like the Abigail stuff and everything comes from. And the whole time when I was early on in the process, I was like, oh, that's silly. And then I got to last year, I was like, I'm in the same boat. And I felt the need to try to get that feeling into the show to some extent as well. I just think that that's interesting. I think it's interesting the way we adapt history, and you can't help but be the sort of God over it. And, well, this is how I think it happened, so here's how maybe it happened. Yeah, and I think there's many different ways to experience witches, and I hope that people out there can get at least some of this out of it.
It enables us to look at it in a comfortable way. There's fear in the story, but I'm not looking at it fearfully. I love that. Hopefully it gives people a comfort level of taking a peek at the history, even though they may not be so sure. Well, I'm not so sure about the devil or these women or witches or magic. You can still step into this creation and just look around. There's so much in it. It's great to revisit it. I loved going back and reading the script after seeing it.
I'm so glad. Great. Yeah, I guess that is just ultimately that is the hope with it, that anyone, no matter where you're coming from, like whatever even background or belief system, I think that there is something. I think it tries to just present the story as is. Obviously, I can't help but put on some of my own personal beliefs within it, but I tried to withhold from that as much as possible so that I think many people would be able to take from it what they want, but no matter what, there's still like a baseline of truth and reality in it. And I guess that's interesting.
It is. I think as humans, we look for the people to blame, but if we're getting blamed for something, we try to pull in other people. Like, well, it's all of us. So what does that mean when we're looking at Salem?
Yeah.
There was responsibility on a lot of people for that. And that's comes out in the story. Yeah, it was so great. And I think it's really wonderful too how you give that creative license to those who are going to put it on stage. How are they going to portray the hangings? And I, as a descendant, was nervous about that part, and it was high school level, of course, but they did it with dignity, and it was really moving how they did it. The way they chose to do it was they just flashed a red light, and then the woman that was getting hanged just did this. They had like a gallows prop that was beautiful. It was big and almost like framing the stage, these gallows. But then when they did that, those moments in the story, it was very powerful.
Yeah. And again, and even to that point, for anyone we've talked a lot about how the play is funny and entertaining. It is very much built so that one of the reasons I tried to make it sort of this, again, roller coaster ride of you're laughing a lot. And then when you hit that point of it, it was very purposeful. Like, no, now we're going to like hit a wall. And it's like, it's no longer funny at this moment in time because now all of these consequences have actually caught up to the people. And so that's where, again, there is full freedom because the comfort level is going to be different no matter where people are coming from of that sort of visual imagery. And I guess it can be powerful in many different ways. So I'll obviously think it's the horror of seeing the objects is something that was always interested me. A red light and emotion will also get it across. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the story of Salem is just so interesting in itself that you didn't have to invent a lot.
No.
You just went with the story that was already there, threw in some comedic elements, emphasized some things that were funny about it, really stuck to it because it's so interesting.
Yeah, that's Witches in Salem.
Your website is awesome.
Oh, good.
And all of your work is a lot. There's so much to look at on there.
Okay.
Tell us about what people will find when they go to your website.
Yeah, www.mattcoxland.com. It needs an update, let me tell you that. Maybe I will soon. Yeah, upcoming right now. I have you can get some of the information about other things I've worked on in the past, the big one being the play Puffs, which a lot of high schools and regional theaters do perform, so there's a good chance that every once in a while there's a production happening near you. If you enjoy the story of a certain boy wizard and want to see it from another perspective. I have another play that I wrote once upon a time called Kapowie Go-Go, which was this sort of big, epic, 5-hour-long, like Saturday morning cartoon, anime, fantasy, sci-fi, throwing everything at the wall. Currently, if you do find yourself in New York, I run a monthly-ish show called Giant Skybeam at the Second City Theater in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. That's where me and my writing partner, Stephen Stout, we pick a different genre and we write a script very quickly and rehearse it. We have one upcoming soon. That's like a sports movie. It's called The King of the Ping for the Love of the Pong. It's going to be very silly. And similar to that, sometime over this summer, we're going to be revamping one of those plays that we did. It's called 2002. It's a story about high school and time travel. And then be on the lookout. One other big project I have coming up is a musical called True Crime Frankenstein. It's written with a wonderful artist named Eli Bolin. It's an adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but by way of a true crime podcast. And has some similar elements to Witches in Salem, certainly, actually.
Awesome.
Be on the lookout for that. And you know what? Those are all going to be on my website soon. Because I have been a bad artist and not kept up with that.
Well, as it is, though, there's website experiences for users can be different things. And you feel once you get on there, you feel like, oh, I want to take some time to look through this. What's this Puffs and is it the egg scream on there?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm a sound designer as well for my plays. I do for Witches, we offer an old high school friend of mine named Brian Metolius does all the music for the shows that I write, and then I'll make a sound file for it. And that was one from Puffs, just me screaming into a microphone, but I thought it was funny to put it on there.
That's awesome. Yeah. So updates will be great, but it's still a really great site to check out to get a feel for your skills and talent. And yeah.
Thank you so much. That's very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can our audience support you?
Yeah. For the most part, it's if you see a production of Puffs happening near you, go check it out. You can follow me. I'm Coxy Loxy, COXXYLOXXY on Instagram. That's really the only social media I vaguely keep up with. And that's where I do my most updates of what's coming soon. We'll probably actually be doing a crowdfund sort of Kickstarter type thing for a play that's upcoming in mine soon. So if you keep an eye out on either the website or my Instagram, I'll have information about that probably in the coming months. That is a way to directly support me. Otherwise, yeah, if you're interested in Puffs, you can rent it. We have a filmed version of it that we filmed when we were off Broadway. That's available basically where you can rent or stream anything. YouTube, Amazon, all the places. Yeah, that is also a way to directly support the work. Yeah.
This was awesome, wasn't it? Well, we love discussing Salem a lot. Make sure you catch our other podcast, The Thing About Salem, to hear more Salem.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.